I'm joined now by someone who's worked extensively as a producer more recently, both here in the UK and abroad. But when he first joined the BBC, an early job for him would have been Doctor Who. So I'd like to introduce floor assistant Chris Moss. How are you?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you.
And are you making the most of the nice weather at the moment?
Well, the weather's not too good at the moment. I mean, it was glorious last week, wasn't it? But now it's it's a bit dull and grey here. Although we'd love to have some rain, but unfortunately not enough.
So I wanted to take you back to the early 70s when you were a floor assistant. What does that actually involve?
Well, I joined the BBC in summer of 1972 as a floor assistant. I've been working in rep theatre up until then. And I wanted to work for the drama department, but the drama department told me they weren't hiring direct, and the best thing to do was to get a job, if you could, as a floor assistant with the studio management department, which enabled you to apply for internal jobs. Because at that time, the majority of jobs within the BBC were filled internally before they were advertised externally. So I joined as a floor assistant, bit of a come down, but it was still it was a very interesting job, and you were basically a call boy or a runner in the studio, and it would have been my job on a drama program to attend one rehearsal, to meet the actors, to talk with the production manager about what time he or she needed the actors on set, to rehearse on the first day of the studio, and he liaised with costume and makeup about costume and makeup calls, and then 2 days later I'd fetch up in the studio 10 o'clock in the morning. The actors would turn up by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I'd have to make sure that they went through the costume and makeup routines, turn up in the studio on the right set at the right time, and at the same time I would be responsible for all the extras as well.
So Doctor Who must have been a fairly busy show to work on, because famously you've got people in alien outfits, you've got supporting artists, all sorts to keep you busy.
I think at that time it wasn't just Doctor Who, it was everything was pretty busy to work on, because in those days we didn't have rehearse and record. You went into the studio and you blocked all the moves, because it was a multi-camera setup where you would have 4 or 5, sometimes 6 cameras on one set, and you would block all that, and then you would do a dress rehearsal, and you didn't get recordings until the evening. So you used to have from 7:30 until 10 o'clock to record, and the idea was to record as live, because recording videotape time was very, very expensive, and there were very few machines available, so there was virtually no time for editing. So you just went for it and did the whole lot. So you had to be on your mark at all, especially as a floor assistant, because you would get costume rooms attached to the studio, but also in the basement or television centre, dressing rooms all over the place. So you were running around constantly trying to get the right people onto the set at the right time. And it wasn't too bad in the rehearsals, because the people weren't fully costumed, fully made up. When you got to the dress rehearsal, everybody had to be in costume and fully made up. And the only way you could recognise people, we used to put name tags on them, so you knew who the actors were, who the extras were, and what set they should be in. But of course, by the time you came to the recording, we had to take the name tags off. So you were completely lost. So it was always going into makeup, and you could see half a dozen people all looking exactly the same. They were all Cybermen, or they, all covered in latex. You just have to hope you got the right person at the right time.
So your first encounter with Doctor Who would have been the 3 Doctors. Do you remember a great deal about the 3 actors playing the Doctors?
I'm pretty sure I worked on it, because all the dates fit. And I remember the fact that William Hartnell was too ill to appear in the studio, and they had pre-recorded him on film in Ealing Studios, and that was played in to the recording. I remember that, and I remember the director, Lenny Main, as well. That's why I'm pretty sure I worked on that one. But apart from that, you know, quite often a lot of them just blur together, you know.
Yeah. So you mentioned Lenny Main, you know, sort of sticks out to you. So what was it about him that was particularly memorable?
He was a nice guy. Most people were in those days, actually. And I worked with him later years on other programs as well. But unfortunately, he died quite young. I think he was in his mid-50s or something when he died. Yeah. Australian, happy.
Yes, yeah, sadly lost at sea. But was Paul Bernard, your second Who director, memorable as well?
No, I wouldn't have. We wouldn't have come into contact at that stage because, you know, I wasn't part of the production team. I would have known the director because I would have been on the cans, and I would have been listening to all the direction from the gallery, whereas the second wouldn't, because in those days the second purely looked after props, and that was it.
A story that you were heavily involved with was The Power of Kroll, which...
The Power of the Kroll, yes. Interesting.
So a lot of that was done on location. Was that a particularly challenging and busy show for you then?
It was. We filmed most, well, apart from the studio, all the location work was shot at a place called Icken Fen, which is near Snape in Suffolk, just outside Woodbridge. I remember it was bad weather, and of course the fen was completely marsh. So you went from this idyllic scene of tufts of grass and little islands with huge mud kind of channels between them, and then when the tide came in, of course it gradually filled up and filled up and filled up. So the whole filming was scheduled around the state of the tides. I remember on day one we had a problem with the caterers. I think the caterers' truck broke down, or they went bankrupt or something. So it wasn't a very good start. And then there were the Green Men. We had a lot of extras all dressed up in loincloths, and they were head to toe in green makeup. And Keziah, the winner makeup designer, had managed to find this green makeup, which was water resistant, because during the filming they were in and out of the water and sliding, going through the mud. So we needed this stuff that would stick all day. And it was mucky stuff. And the problem was getting it off at the end of the day. Now, Wikipedia say that she failed to buy the removal cream for it. Well, that's a load of nonsense, because all you needed was a lot of hot water and a lot of soap. And I remember as I'd arranged to get all the extras showered at RAF Bentwaters, which was an American air base at the time near Woodbridge. And I remember on the first day taking them up, there were about 10 of them, and they all completely green, head to toe in green with little loincloths. And to get to the showers that were in the gymnasium, we had to walk down the side of the gym. And as we entered the gym, there were these guys playing basketball. And you could watch, you could hear the basket going bump, 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 bump. And as we all started to walk down the side of the gym, you could hear the ball going bump, 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 bump. And suddenly everything stopped. And these two teams just stopped and stared as this procession of one BBC assistant floor manager, followed by 10 green men. And the showers worked perfectly well. The only trouble was around the crevices, like in the crevices of the eyes and just around underneath the nose. It took ages before you could remove it. So all the extras and the actors, for days and days after the shoot, still had little bits of green that gradually disappeared. But unlike what it says in Wikipedia, they didn't need a chemical bath to remove it.
So it was certainly a memorable shoot then, because am I also right in thinking you were responsible for finding the hovercraft?
Yes, we were talking in the office about how people would have got around on this planet, and I remember a few weeks before seeing a Tomorrow's World program where this company had made this small little hovercraft. You could sit about 5 or 6 people in it, and I, through Tomorrow's World, I contacted the company who made it, who very kindly said they would lend me the hovercraft, and I must admit it was great fun. The only problem was, as you know, when you have a hovercraft and it goes in water, it sends up a load of spray either side. Well, of course, we didn't just have water, we had mud. And of course, as the hovercraft went in, it sent a huge shower of mud over everybody in it. But I don't think it ever appeared in the end. It broke down. And I remember when we needed it to actually, for the shoot, I couldn't get it started. So I don't think it ever appeared in the shoot.
Because a lot of the time they're sort of paddling around in little canoes, so it obviously didn't.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I certainly remember driving the hovercraft around with the camera crew, so we could get across loads of mud and take the camera equipment across, things like that. But I certainly remember that when it was needed to be envisioned, it just didn't work.
So after all of this, getting into studio must have been a welcome relief for you then.
Well, yeah, yes and no. I mean, everybody preferred working on location, of course, because you made more money, because you had your overnight allowance, and in those days you were paid the overnight allowance in cash, and you always stayed somewhere cheaper than your allowance covered. But the studio, yeah, I think there were 1 or 2 problems with the studio. I mean, I remember Philip Maddock wasn't entirely happy with the script, and he was brought in at the last minute because who was Alan Howard, I think, was originally cast in the part, and was ill on the first day of rehearsal and had to be replaced quite quickly. So that's how Philip Maddock got the job.
And how was the director, Norman Stewart, to work with?
Norman was great. I wouldn't say Norman was one of the greatest directors out, but as an individual, he was a nice man. He was a nice man.
You said earlier that you had been at RADA with Mary Tam, am I right in thinking?
Yes, yes. So yeah, I did the technical course. She was, of course, on the acting course, and I was on the technical course at the same time. So she would have left probably about a year after I'd left. Rather, she would have graduated the following year, because their course was 1 year longer than the technical course.
So it must have been nice then to be working with her, probably not that long after graduating, I imagine.
Yeah, no, it was quite interesting, because in the theatre, I'd worked with quite a few of the people I'd worked with, I'd been at college with, but unfortunately not her. I then met her again years later when I was a line producer on Between the Lines.
Oh, it just shows what a small industry it is.
Oh God, yes, but it's amazing that there's some people you meet on your first day at the BBC, or anywhere, I suppose, and you never see again. And they're in constant work. But I mean, I can remember people, and I think, what happened to them?
But of course, as well as doing Doctor Who at the time, you also worked on Blake’7, which I imagine can't have been that dissimilar.
No, but I mean, Blake’7, but Blake’7 at that stage was slightly different because that was you were doing 50-minute episodes, whereas I think still Doctor Who was still doing 30-minute episodes. But I enjoyed Blake’7 as well. It was fun. It was a nice cast. We had a lot of fun, and it was great producer Verity Lambert. And I worked with a director called David Sullivan Proudfoot, who again was a lovely man to work with, but unfortunately became ill at one point, and Veer, as producer, stepped in to direct. And I always remember we were filming down in Wareham in a quarry, sand quarry in Wareham. And there was Veer, and he wasn't a young man. So Veer was in his mid-60s at the time, and he was explaining to the stuntmen how he wanted them, this fight, to fall, and there was this huge sand kind of bank going into the quarry, and he wanted it to fall and roll down the sand to the bottom of the quarry. So Veer launched himself onto the sand and rolled all the way down and said, that's how I want it. You think, well, why do we employ a stuntman?
So as you progressed through the BBC, who were the people that you particularly learned from then?
I learned, one of the great things about the BBC in the early days was you were allowed to make mistakes. So if you made a genuine mistake, everybody would rally around to try to support you. I think in later years, when we got into the freelance culture, a lot of fingers were being pointed because I maybe get their job. But the people I remember most were people I probably worked with much later in life. Verity Lambert, who I worked with on Jonathan Creek, was a delight to work with. She was absolutely fantastic, but was tough. Paul Knight was another guy I worked with for a long period on Paul Knight did London's Burning and The Knock and things like that. And I did a thing called Murder in Mine with him. We worked together for 3 years on that. And he was a delight to work with as well. And of course, there was All Creatures Great and Small, which, well, who wouldn't want to work in the Yorkshire Dales for a few years?
Because All Creatures, famously, you don't work with animals and kids in television. So did it live up to that saying? How was it?
It was tremendous because we had a veterinary advisor that was a local vet out of Leyburn, where we were based, and Jack. And Jack came up with amazing things, and everything you saw really happened. Although I remember it on one series I did, it was still in the days when you had the BBC non-working supervisor, the prop men. The supervisor was supposed to be non-working and just instructed all his men. And it was old style BBC still. And I remember turning up and I was like the production manager and first AD. And on the first day on location, he turned to me and he said, "My men don't do anything with animals." And for the rest of the shoot, they spent most of the time sitting on the dining bus playing cards. And then it was the time of the Chernobyl accident. And of course, he had read in the paper that they were having to throw away milk in Cumbria at the time because of the radioactive cloud coming across. And he turned around one day and he said, "We don't go on fields because they're all radioactive." But there was nothing you could do because his department, his managers would just back him up, you know.
So did that particularly prepare you well for other productions? Because, yeah, as you say, there's not much you can do. You've just got to get on with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was always so many other people who would cover. You just did it. You did it. I mean, he was the only one who refused to work with animals, and it was very interesting that one of his men, who also refused to do anything around animals, the rest of the crew ostracized them. So when you had evenings, you know, down the pub, they were never invited because no one wanted them around. And then the BBC changed because they closed down the design department and all your staff suddenly became freelance. And about 2 years later, I was back on the show and the designer wanted to use this one prop man, and he was a delight. And he couldn't have worked harder, and he loved every minute of it, and the crew liked him, and you know, and it was just such a change.
So it was something like Jonathan Creek, you know, working with Verity Lambert. Was that a little bit more straightforward then?
The one thing with Jonathan Creek, you had to strictly keep to the script. Even down to, if it said a red box, you would actually have to show the writer 6 red boxes so he could make sure, that's the type of red I'm talking about. Having said that, a delight to work with again, you know, and that was great fun. That was good.
And had you come across that sort of similarity, the sticking to the script, on Miss Marple as well, or was that a little bit more flexible, should we say?
Well, when I was working on Miss Marple, I was the location manager, so I didn't really get involved in that at all. We filmed that up in Dis on the Suffolk-Norfolk borders, so I was just responsible for setting up the location and managing the location.
Because you worked on the 4th of those Joan Hickson Marples. By that point, they were established success. Was it quite nice to sort of get one under your belt?
Oh yes, but also working with Joan Hickson, she was such a nice lady to work with. One of the great things about the industry is that you work with so many nice people. Okay, there are some nice shits you can work with, but most people, both cast and crew, are delights. You know, they're a delight to work with.
And more recently, your work has taken you abroad. How did that come about then?
The BBC's World Service Trust, which is I think they're called Media Action then. No, but then they were still called the BBC World Service Trust. They are a charitable arm of the BBC, and they're not funded by the license fee at all. A lot of the money was coming from DFID, the Department of International Agents, you know, funding agents or something. And they were setting up a multimedia campaign in Cambodia as part of an HIV awareness campaign, because Cambodia had a very high incident of HIV infection. And Matthew Robinson, who had been, you know, executive producer of EastEnders and had been the head of drama in Wales, took a job as executive producer to set up a soap opera, because part of the multimedia campaign, there was going to be a radio campaign, a print media campaign, commercials. and a soap opera, which was going to try to get this message across. And Mel Young, the head of drama at the time, didn't think that, or thought that Mel needed a little bit of help. So he offered Mel a line producer just to help for 4 weeks to go out there if Matthew could pay the airfare, that he would let someone who wanted to do it. And of course, as soon as I heard about this, I was in there, and my 4 weeks ended up 4 months, and I was part of a small team, a DOP called Bill Broomfield, Nick Somerville, a designer, and me, and of course Matthew, and we had to train up a complete crew, including actors, because there was no history of making soap operas. We had to set up a studio, build a studio, get all the equipment together, train them, train the editors, do everything for them to produce this soap opera, which in the end was very, very successful. And it ran for 2 series. And I think in total, there was something like 60 episodes made over a couple of years. And I went back to do, on the 2nd year, just to help out in my spare time. I took my annual leave entitlement and went out. And then I wanted to leave the BBC. I just had enough of the BBC. It was changing so much, and it just wasn't a nice place to work anymore. And I was persuaded to take over as a senior line producer on Casualty, because one of my colleagues wanted to go as well, and they promised him before me that they would let him go. And when I was on Casualty, they didn't have a idea of what they were going to do for their special, because every year they made it a special, and this was the 21st anniversary of Casualty. So I thought I did a brief storyline which they accepted, which coincidentally was shot in Cambodia. So I went out there to Cambodia, and we shot the special in Cambodia. And after that, I left the BBC, and I joined Matthew and Bill with the initial intent. We just wanted to make a feature film, a local feature film in Cambodia, which we did. We lost money on it, of course, but we also we formed a company, Khmer Mekong Films, and we started to get quite a lot of work doing local kind of public information things, local dramas. I used to write some stuff for a comedy sketch show, you know, and there was quite a lot of work. So we formed the company, and we continued doing that. And I stayed there for a year, playing around doing that. And then I got a job with the BBC in Vietnam, again with the charitable arm again, because they wanted to replicate the HIV campaign that had been successful in Cambodia, and they wanted to do it in Vietnam. So I went over to Vietnam and had a very interesting contract, which guaranteed me X number of weeks' work over a 3-year period, which was great, because then I just did the work, and then I took time out when I wanted to, and managed to travel all over the place, around Southeast Asia, up through China and Laos and Indonesia, and working at the same time.
So obviously, when you started though, you worked in theatre. How did that prepare you for television? Was it overly different?
I think the theatre gave you bloody worked hard in the theatre, especially in rep. I mean, when I joined the theatre, my first job in the theatre was with Glyndebourne Opera. And I did a tour with Glyndebourne Opera, and then I worked on the season Then I worked in rep down in Devon, the Northcote Theatre in Exeter, and then went to the Liverpool Playhouse. And it was tough because, you know, I'd be rehearsing in the morning. So we would rehearse in the morning and the afternoon, and then in the evening there was performance of the show you'd been rehearsing 2 weeks before. So it was very long hours. And the same thing happened in the BBC, especially in drama, you know, as you know. You know, people talk about 40, you know, 38-hour or 35-hour weeks or whatever. I mean, you know, my location managers, yeah, you know, a 74-hour week was normal. You know, I'm the last big shoot I'm in Jonathan Creek. You know, shooting in London. I'll be getting up at 5 o'clock every morning and having to be on the road before 6 o'clock if the location was down in Wandsworth or even worse, Greenwich. And then I wouldn't be home sometimes on a Friday night from Greenwich. I wouldn't get home to about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And we work 6-day weeks, of course.
Well, we've touched on all sorts of things you've done in your career, and I think it's safe to say it's been incredibly mixed and varied, also, you know, taking you abroad. I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time, Chris.
Well, I'm happy. I've when I left school, I wanted to be a policeman. I became a police cadet, and then after a year and a half, I thought I'd made a mistake. And that's when I decided to go into the theatre, and my parents just couldn't understand why. And even when I was working in rep, you know, the pay was appalling. And when I got the job at the BBC, they were so delighted. And I must say that you know, I've had my ups and downs, but most times I've looked forward to going to work in the morning. And as soon as one production ends, I've been looking forward to starting the next one, and I can't think of any job where it's not just me, where so many people just look forward to going to work because they're doing something creative, they're working with great people, they're working in different places all the time. I'm not going to the same office every day.
Yes, no 2 days are the same by any means.
No, it might be bloody cold and you've got to worry all the time about getting through the traffic to get to the location on time, and you know, things like that. But yeah.
Well, thank you for your time and for talking to me about some of those jobs.